It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers.
I feel like we can run the table. We're going to do it.
Your daily Green Bay Packers podcast.
Rodgers gets out.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Floats it.
Your team
Cobb.
every day.
Touchdown.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for SB Nation and Packer Report. I cover the NFL around the internet. You can follow me on Twitter at Peter_Bukowski. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers, the #1 Packers podcast on the internet. And the show for fans who know what happened. They want to know why and how. Today's episode is brought to you by Pepsi. This football season will be different, and Pepsi is here to get you ready for game day no matter how you watch this season. Pepsi is the refreshment you need to power through game day and become a member of the League of Football Watchers, because Pepsi isn't made for those who play the game. It's made for those who watch it. Pepsi, made for football watching. Tyler Dunne, formerly of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, formerly of Bleacher Report, now of his own personal content platform, is on the show today to talk about the story he wrote about Jordan Love, about A.J. Dillon, great anecdote about Jay Sternberger. We're going to talk about the toughness of this team, their plan with Jordan Love, and we're going to talk a little bit of Aaron Rodgers, because the last time he was on this show, he was on it because he wrote what was a pretty scathing investigative report, and maybe that's going a little overboard in terms of what it was in terms of investigative, but it was a story pulling back the curtain in the relationship between Aaron Rodgers and Mike McCarthy. And so I want to see if his perception of anything has changed over the last few years, because it does seem to me anyway, the perception of Rodgers has changed among fans. It has changed among media, and I think most importantly, it has changed among teammates and coaches. And maybe the answer is as simple as, you know what, number 12 has changed a little bit too. And, I think, frankly, it's a little bit of a lot of different things. So we're going to talk to Ty about that. Before we do that, though, it looks like Raven Green is going to be out a while. It looks like Tyler Ervin is going to be out a while. And I want to talk about their replacements. If Raven Green is going to be out a while, that leaves the Packers with a decision to make about how they handle their, not just their base defense, but their sub-package defense. And this is important because they play so much sub-package. Mike Patton loves to play that. It's really a big dime look, frankly, but they call it big nickel, where you play with the single linebacker and you have a safety in that linebacker spot along with the extra cornerback. And it is a spot that Raven Green has played this season, and I think has played it admirably. He has not been a game changer, has not been a field tilter necessarily, but he's been solid, right? What do you do if he's not in there? Do you just say, okay, Will Redmond, you're up? I don't think either Redmond or Vernon Scott, the rookie, are ideal fits to simply assume that role. I don't think the prudent call here is to just play next man up football. What I think makes more sense is to say, rather than play some of that super sub package hybrid type defense, at least on first and second down, feel comfortable just keeping Kamel Martin on the field. I went back and watched the tape, and he is someone who is not perfect in his run fits. He's not perfect in his reads. I think he can be a little over-aggressive, chasing downhill in the run game, get out of position in the back end. Unfortunately, that's a problem for Christian Kirksey as well, a little bit. And in some ways, it's by design. If you're going to make a mistake at 100 miles an hour, and that is something that Mike Patton has preached really for a long time. But the advantage you gain with Martin, especially on, let's say, 2nd and 10, 2nd and 8, when maybe you would go to that hybrid look and bring Raven Green in and take Martin off the field. Let's say a team does run the ball. You're giving up a not insignificant amount with Green on the field, given his size and his strength and his playmaking. Martin makes a handful of plays a game, even in limited snaps. And he did it again on Sunday. You know, he had a missed tackle for loss on a tackle that he just fell off. Early in the game, he comes back, is shot out of a cannon, and makes a TFL on Miles Sanders a little bit later on. He is a playmaker. He is a tone setter for your defense because of the mentality that he brings to your defense. This is a question about mentality. And so after this whole discussion we have with Mike Pettin about what is happening with the man coverage versus zone coverage and the front and what they're doing and how they're attacking quarterbacks versus not attacking, if you want the attacking player, and it seems like that's what this defense wants to do, they want to play downhill, then you put Kamal Martin on the field and you live with the mistakes. I think they have allowed Raven Green, frankly, to play too much of slot corner. You know, if it's a situation where they're just going to play sides and you've got Chandon Sullivan on one side against a tight end and Raven Green on the other against a receiver, they seem to be fine with that. I'm not. That doesn't make sense. And this is tied into the conversation we had yesterday about the amount of man coverage that the Packers are playing. If you play more man coverage, you have to be more cognizant about these matchups. And that means giving Chandon Sullivan the opportunity to chase receivers in the slot. And maybe you do put Christian Kirksey or Kamal Martin out on a tight end and say, let's see what you can do. Because most of the tight ends that the Packers are going to face are not going to kill them. They're not going to kill them. And very few tight ends in the league are capable of beating you by themselves. Darren Waller, Travis Kelce, George Kittle. That's really the full list. And you can start to add Big Bob Tonyan to that list because he has injected himself into that conversation. You have to account for him every time you're on the field against the Packers offense. They're going to find him the ball if you don't cover him sufficiently. I think this has as much to do about Martin's development as it does with the players that you have behind. Because Will Redmond, Vernon Scott, those guys are just not it. They're just not going to give you enough. And you need to get a player who can make some impact plays. And Raven Green doesn't always do that, but Martin can. And so this is really, in some ways, just an end around to get Martin more opportunities on the field because they're taking him off the field. In some of these situations, I think, frankly, if you played and gave Martin all of Kirksey's snaps, I think this defense would probably be better, even if it meant some mistakes from Martin. I think he'd make more impact plays, and this is how I feel about Darnell Savage too. You live with the valleys because of what the peaks can be. That's how I feel about Kamal Martin. Now, the flip side of this is Tyler Ervin. Because Tyler Ervin looks like he's going to be out a little while, and he now has this problem. In a more prominent role, he is not able to stay healthy and has not been able to stay healthy this year. Luckily, the Packers have Tavon Austin, who you hope can get up to speed. He's not going to be able to come in and play 80% of snaps or something right away, but he can come in and say, all right, I can do the jet sweeps. I can run some of these mesh concepts. I can do some little underneath stuff for you, and I can be the return guy. You have a plan there. And it's a good plan, frankly. Now, I think what this tells us is, number one, Matt LaFleur has found a way to continue to use motion after, early injuries to Ervin scuttled his desire to do so. I think it also underscores the idea that while I do think the Packers have been able to make do with the receivers that they have, getting someone who can do a little bit more the kind of things that Ervin can in terms of the jet sweep motion and the quick passes and to be a little bit more dynamic after the catch. It's a type of player they don't have. Do I think it needs to be someone you use a first round pick on? No, I don't. Do I think it's someone you need to even spend a second or a third round pick on? Not necessarily. If you did it, great, fine. I don't think you need to do that. You can get these kinds of players. You can get Tavon Austin on the street, frankly, but you can get a young guy, second, third, fourth, even the fifth round, who is just going to play this role and can provide that for you. And part of the reason that you can be okay with that is the evolution of Devontae Adams to become, one of the best receivers. Alan Lazard loves to tweet top 2, not 2, which means he's the best receiver in football. I think Lazard's growth here is huge. Big Bob Tunyon's growth is huge. Jay Sternberger still has plenty of room to grow. And we haven't even talked about Josiah DeGuara, who's coming back next year. And then, EQ, MVS guys who are talented players, but don't play that role specifically. Green Bay has a short-term answer. I think it's worth thinking about a long-term answer in both of these cases, because I do think Kamel Martin is your every down linebacker moving forward, and I would be pretty excited about it, at least about the upside and the talent and the physicality and the force that he brings to that position. If I'm looking at the draft, though, and this team, I do wonder who is that hybrid player. I do wonder who that jet sweep guy is. And so if you're looking at guys who can come in and make an instant impact, maybe they feel good about Josh Jackson coming in and playing corner. They're going to let Kevin King walk. They have a plan at the offensive line. And those are really the places where you might be losing starters and don't, necessarily need to make a move, because you have a corner, you have a center, you have a pass rusher if you want to move on from Preston Smith. They don't have a swing tackle if they're going to move on from Rick Wagner, but you can also keep Rick Wagner. He's cheap and you deal, or, you cut him and you have a backup plan in the draft. I don't be surprised, is what I'm saying, that if on day 2, the Packers draft some sort of safety linebacker hybrid early and a run after catch, maybe Deebo Samuel light kind of player. Obviously not Deebo, because Deebo was a top 40 pick. But, if they want to draft an offensive tackle, a right tackle of the future or something like that early, if they want to take a cornerback early, I think that's in the cards. Look, take the safety early. And if you want, take the receiver early. That's fine too. I mean, the impact, we talked all offseason about the guy who could most impact his team is an impact receiver. And that's mostly just because I feel receivers can really be impactful players overall in any situation. But they have some opportunities here in the offseason to upgrade those positions. Luckily for them, they have options now on guys that they can throw out there and feel pretty good about being useful players in this defense. Before we get to Ty, let's talk about our friends at Built Bar. Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar ever, and they've added 6 new flavors like caramel brownie and cookies and cream to an already loaded lineup that features names like salted caramel, peanut butter brownie, German chocolate, and so many more. They're 100% chocolate covered. They're soft, they're easy to chew. Best of all, they're low calorie, low sugar, high protein, and high fiber. These things are legit delicious. If you don't believe me, I'm telling you, you will be amazed. If you make a purchase and you are freaking out, I'm telling you, do not freak out. These things are the goods. Go to BuiltBar.com and use promo code LOCKEDON to get 20% off your next order. That's promo code LOCKEDON for 20% off at BuiltBar.com.
Hey, what's happening? It's your boy Q, host of the Locked On Raiders podcast, and I hope you guys feasted on the MyBookie Turkey Day free play that allowed users to grab themselves a risk-free bet up to $250. It was basically a free shot at trying to double your money. If you didn't get in on that, what are you doing? Nah, but seriously, now is the time to get some skin in the game with MyBookie, where odds boost, lightning deals, and free bets await all season long. And with the NFL playoffs right around the corner, we know who these teams are. We know what they're capable of, and it's not difficult to find some value in the lines. Whether you're a first-time customer or have been playing with MyBookie for years, there is no shortage of value to be found in the thousands of game lines, unique prop bets, and contests that they offer every week. Sign up or get reloaded today. Find an edge, make your bet, and get paid. They also boast a fully fledged casino platform giving you access to all the classic table, slot, and card games you'd expect to find at your local spot. And the best part is, at MyBookie, the doors never close, so you can continue to build your bankroll even after the stadium lights have gone out. Make the right play and sign up today at MyBookie. And when you do, use promo code LOCKEDON to get your deposit matched halfway, all the way up to $1,000. The terms are simple. You put in $200, they'll match you with another $100 in your account. If you were already planning to bet this season, this is free betting money. It's winning season at MyBookie, so come join in on the fun and win some cash while you're at it.
All right, let's get to our conversation with Tyler Dunne, formerly of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. He was on the Great Packers podcast with Bob McGinn back when they were both at JS. You can follow him on Twitter at Ty Dunne. He now is the main content creator, the founder of Go Long, which is a newsletter dedicated to football journalism. And you can check that out now, even before you have to pay for it, just to make sure it's something that you're interested in. I highly recommend you go check that out. Ty, thanks for coming back on Locked On Packers.
Great to be here, man. Been too long. Always good to hear your voice, a familiar voice.
Yours as well. And I'm delighted to have you on because you wrote 2 pieces for your new, are we calling it a vertical? What is the name here for what you're working on now?
Yeah, you can call it whatever you want, publication, vertical, newsletter, probably newsletter's the way to go. There's Substack. So it's a subscription newsletter. We're just focusing on enterprising pro football journalism. Hopefully tell you a story you haven't read before.
Well, and certainly there was some great stuff in the stories that you put out over the weekend on Jordan Love and AJ Dillon's thighs. And I want to start with the Jordan Love piece because there was one nugget in there that in terms of like newsworthiness really stood out to me, along with a lot of great anecdotes about, what the players had to say about Love. And that was that Matt LaFleur was the only NFL head coach to talk to, was it his offensive coordinator? Was it his old head coach about Jordan Love?
Correct. I'm glad you caught that. Yeah, David Yost, he was the OC at Utah State. Really when Jordan Love was at his best, right? His second to last year there, second year there. So, I was surprised to hear that as well. I mean, Yost said, look, I talked to scouts and people around the league, but Matt LaFleur was the only head coach that I spoke to directly, and it was a long conversation. They had known each other from the scouting trail. Back when LaFleur was at Notre Dame, it's a pretty small fraternity, believe it or not. So they knew each other, but it was a connection. A scout there in Green Bay who actually lived with Daryl Franklin, actually lived with Yost when he was at another school. So this assistant is telling, Yost, hey, we love your guy. We're watching Jordan Love. He connected LaFleur with Yost, and they had a conversation that I feel like Matt LaFleur probably had with a lot of people who knew Jordan Love.
And so, this is, I think, evidence that Green Bay zeroed in on Love early. We've had some reporting that was something that they really, really liked him from the jump. They didn't fall ass backwards into Jordan Love.
Exactly. Right. They didn't, this wasn't just, throwing a dart at a board and, hoping for the best. This was a quarterback they targeted, and they're not dumb. I mean, they know their fan base, better than anybody. They know what the reaction with the backlash is going to be. And they know Aaron Rodgers better than anybody. They know what that backlash is going to be. So to make this pick, to take this plunge, they absolutely knew everything that went into it. And, do they look at Jordan Love as Patrick Mahomes 2.0, as one of his wide receivers does, and put 3 times in our story? I'm not sure. Maybe. Who knows? But they love him, and they took him for a reason. And I don't think they mind the collateral damage. I mean, they know what their QB1 is like, how he's wired. He's always searching for a slight, a grudge, whatever you want to call it. And you can't really draw one up with more impact than, drafting the man's replacement.
What I thought was interesting is just the framing of the story was through this lens of, hey, teams don't usually try this. Teams don't usually build for the future while they have a Hall of Fame quarterback. And the list of teams that have gone from one to another is pretty short. I mean, you've got the 49ers. They go from Montana to Young. Obviously, the Packers did it with Favre to Rodgers. And as you pointed out, this is something that they're thinking about not just this year, but in 2025, what this team is going to look like.
Isn't that fascinating? I think, when you actually look at the numbers and then just the game that a rookie quarterback finally sees the field as a starter, it I don't know, blew my mind. I know Albert Breer does a great job of charting this all, but I think it was Aaron Rodgers' 49th game that he started. The second closest since 2001 is Phillip Rivers at his 33rd game, and I think 33 of 44 quarterbacks played by their 10th game.
Yep.
So for everything you hear out of coaches and GMs, every draft, we took this player, but he's not our guy. He's going to learn. He's going to develop. He's going to sit behind Tyrod Taylor, whoever it is. Whether it's pressure from ownership, pressure from GM, the fan base, or whoever they have as a starter, maybe just not being good enough. I mean, that player is going to play. That's the norm. In Green Bay, it's just different. I mean, they really are the anomaly here. They're the team that genuinely wants to kind of build two teams within one, and they're doing that at quarterback, but they're even doing it elsewhere. I mean, I really think that they love A.J. Dillon at running back, that Matt LaFleur sees a lot of Derrick Henry in him. He has like 26, 27 carries this year? I mean, he's barely played. And I know fans probably look at that like, oh my God, what a bust, what a wasted pick. When the Packers are really looking at this like, okay, no, we're 9-3. Aaron Rodgers is
right.
an MVP candidate. We can win now. Guess what? The Packers, they won in 07 with Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers, breathing down his neck. So you can win now and you can plan for the future. And the absolute worst time to look for a quarterback is when you need one. So they're going to avoid that. It's just different. I'm shocked that more teams don't do it. Like, who cares about hurting someone's feelings? It's professional sports. Like, I think there's a lot of that. I mean, when you look back at these Hall of Fame quarterbacks, their last 2, 3, 4 years, it can be pretty ugly. I mean, it can be rough. I mean, the Giants hung on to Eli Manning way longer than they should have. And, granted, they think they got their guy in Daniel Jones, but who knows? You got to be a little callous. You got to be a little emotionless when you're running the show. And God knows Ted was callous and emotionless, and Brian Gutekunst might be too.
Well, and you know this as someone who lives in New York. When Eli Manning, when they benched him that one season, people freaked out, and it was like the season was over, guys. Like, why would you put Eli out there? And teams don't think that way. In fact, Dan Orlovsky made some waves on Twitter the other day. I guess it was on NFL Live when he said the Eagles, contributed to the breaking of Carson Wentz by drafting Jalen Hurts. And it's like, well, look at Green Bay, because they don't look broken to me.
Exactly. I mean, if you've got a starting quarterback who can't handle that, I don't know the Wentz
then
situation.
Maybe you don't have a starting quarterback, right?
Exactly. You don't have a guy who can just stare down a pass rush in a playoff game, get hit in the jaw, and deliver the throw with everything on the line. It's kind of speaks to mentality, and it's just that sentimentality is. I mean, I get it. Like, I guess it's important to sell something to a fan base, and there's a business aspect to the game. But if we're just talking about the raw game itself, like that Giants situation, I mean, give me a break. Like, Eli was washed by that point. Like, what I know he's got the streak, and that's great. Maybe your argument is, there's nothing else to play for. Let's just keep the streak alive. But I mean, there's too many jobs on the line. I mean, people in the front office, they got jobs to do. They don't want to get fired. They got to think about the team and the franchise, same as the coaches, and that is something that we should look into at Go Long. That's a great idea. I think we'll do it.
I love it. I can't wait to read whatever it is. What I need to know, what prompted the Jay Sternberger anecdote about Jadeveon Clowney? Like, how did you get there? Because I was laughing out loud reading it. It was just as someone who has talked to Jay Sternberger a number of times, it was so fun to hear that.
Oh my God, he was a riot. I'm trying to think back how that came up. I think we were really just talking about the toughness that the Packers need, what Matt LaFleur's done to kind of foster that environment, and he got into his own position coach who really tries to instill that into guys to kind of be jerks out there, kind of be a-holes, get under guys' skin. And that's the example he brought up. I I watched that game live, and I kind of remembered them getting into it, but you don't catch everything on the TV copy, and him kind of providing the play-by-play was fascinating. I mean, like you said, this is something he's always done. He just feels like this magnetic pull to just challenge the biggest, baddest, meanest dude on the field. And that was Jadeveon Clowney that night. And he, from play number 1 all the way through, he was bumping them. He was leg whipping them. He was ticking them off. And, Clowney he lost his cool. And you don't see that a lot out of Clowney where he just loses his cool. Like he tried to take his head off.
Yeah.
With the face mask. But think about it, Pete. I mean, you watch this team, so closely. This past, say since the Super Bowl that they won in 2010, I can remember a time in the 14 playoff game against Dallas when TJ Lang was in a melee and sticking up for guys. But how often have you really just seen like skirmishes like that in a playoff game from this team? I mean, yeah. I feel like you could count on one hand the number of times you just saw guys pissed off and willing to just, roll up their sleeves and take on a dude like Clowney. Ted Thompson did an incredible job building that roster. Nobody's arguing that, but they needed some battered dudes on that team. Just, as guys like to say, dogs. They didn't have a lot of those. Get in that playoff game. I don't think it's a coincidence that they just kind of melted away and got blown out and looked soft in some of these playoff games. They need more Sternbergers out there, and I think they have them.
Yeah, and coaches will often use less safe for work terminologies. MFers, I think is what you will often hear. And I think the Packers have more now than they used to, certainly. And potentially one of them who you brought up, AJ Dillon, he is more than just some massive, glorious quads. I guess I want to know first, what made you interested enough in him to write about him? Because he hasn't, to your point, had that many carries this year.
Yeah, it's just the fact that he is so different. You don't see big, strong, yet fast, athletic running backs in the NFL. I mean, when they drafted him, I'll be honest, I had no clue who he was. I wasn't watching Boston college football. I mean, God, they played Syracuse,
good for you.
But we're not watching Syracuse, Pete, right? I mean, we checked out of them. So I had no idea who this guy was. I was like everybody else. And then just kind of studying up, watching him, speaking to him at length. We talked for a long time. He's the first to say, look, I know it looks different. Like, you don't see guys of my size out there. And he believes teams are just scared that they see somebody like him and just assume he's a goal line back. And he wanted to make it clear, I'm not just a goal line back. Like, I'm somebody with this time in the 40, with this broad jump, with this vertical. And guess what? That's even better than Derrick Henry. And we all saw what Derrick Henry did. And he kept, he'd say, well, I'm not trying to say I am Derrick Henry. I don't, but he kind of was. Like, he believes he can bring that same effect with thighs that, as he put, could feed a family of 5.
And maybe
and I just
more.
kept thinking, right. Oh my God. Yeah. I had to put that picture in the story. But I just had all these flashbacks to Eddie Lacy and man, yeah. Those first 2 years were special. I mean, he started to change the identity of the team a bit. And, for what, 3.5 quarters, 3 7/8 quarters at Seattle, they were a team punching another team in the mouth with an Eddie Lacy. But I don't know if he ever just genuinely loved the game, ate the game, breathed the game, sleep the game. Like, fans would really be shocked to find out, I think, that a lot of guys are just really good at football. They don't necessarily just love it. And, I think there's a lot more going on there with Lacy, like from the childhood with Katrina. He was so open about that. And, it robbed him of his childhood, his innocence. And there's an emptiness there. He didn't know if he'd get back to the eating problems. Unbelievable story in ESPN a few years back on that. So there's a lot going on there. I think with AJ Dillon, you have somebody who genuinely will do everything in his power to put his just ridiculously rare attributes to use. And they just haven't had to use it yet. They got Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams. When they need him, I think he's going to be a force.
Yeah, and he was one of the first guys, not just first rookies, one of the first guys in Green Bay up at Synergy working out, this offseason. So certainly he is willing to put in the work. I got to ask you about this because the last time you were on, we talked about a pretty lengthy and well-reported piece about the relationship and what went wrong with Aaron Rodgers and Mike McCarthy. Over the last couple of years since that has come out, and really since Matt LaFleur has been in Green Bay, I think a lot of public perception about Aaron Rodgers has changed. in terms of his leadership and what he is doing with young players, et cetera. And certainly his relationship with Matt LaFleur seems to be very different than it was with Mike McCarthy at the end. What have you noticed that has changed about Rodgers in that regard? And have you heard anything from guys? Because I know you talk to a lot of players about, Aaron Rodgers and his relationship, whether it's with his teammates, with his franchise, et cetera.
No doubt. I think that it just got to a point there when Mike McCarthy was fired. It was time. I mean, not just the offense. I mean, that was obviously stale, but everything was stale. The whole organization was stale. Yeah. I mean, he was in need of rejuvenation, and he's clearly rejuvenated. I mean, he was rejuvenated very early on with Matt LaFleur. And I know everybody loves to rip Greg Jennings, but Greg Jennings was the one that said, hey, he could be part of the solution. Like, if he buys in to this offense, and look, and I'm not even saying that him freelancing and McCarthy's scheme wasn't the best thing for that. I mean, McCarthy's scheme isn't, it got pretty bad. It got pretty stale itself. I mean, it was pretty antiquated.
No question.
So, I get it. But with a new coach, with a scheme that's going to work and be best for Aaron Rodgers, and you know what, maybe you run the ball a little bit more. Maybe we get you moving a little bit more, get some motion, get some misdirection, do all that kind of stuff. It's going to help him in the long haul. And by all accounts, it seems like he's bought in and the offense is rejuvenated. He's rejuvenated. And I think the fact that the personnel around him has just completely changed helps too. I mean, he's got a lot of young players around him that are hungry. Like Alan Lazard and Jay Sternberger said, it's hard to get on his page, but it's a challenge. Like you want to try to make it clear to Aaron Rodgers that he can trust you in any situation. Yeah. And it's tough to get to that point. But I think, it's funny, after that story came out, and, you heard from some players on Twitter that, it didn't choose to speak for the story, but did afterwards, but that's beside the point. But I got calls from some other guys that aren't necessarily going to put it out. And there was one young receiver who was in Green Bay. I won't say his name. We just talked for a half hour, and he had, 6, 7, 8 more different stories about number 12 and just how demanding it was and how he just had complete control in practice. And so Edgar Bennett, receivers coach, at one point was just just do whatever he says. And didn't speak very kindly of him. But, guys like that, I mean, they're not there anymore, Right. And I think Rodgers probably has matured and evolved over time. We'll see, I mean, you won't be able to really judge everything until the playoffs, until that NFC Championship game, and they've gotten their butts whipped in that game. Even as recently as last year, here we were talking about Sternberger taking on Clowney and them being tougher. Well, they got whacked the next week. So I think we're really going to learn all about Aaron Rodgers at this point of his career, all about this Packers right now under Matt LaFleur in that game, and there's a good chance they get to that game.
Yeah, and it should be said that Jay Sternberger scored his first career touchdown that next week. So just I'm just saying, let my listeners know where they can find this new newsletter. It's the Ty Dunne Vertical to me. So I'm going to call it that too.
Beautiful. They can find it at golongtd, like my initials and touchdown.com, golongtd.com. And right now, stories are opened up for everybody because I want people to get a sense for the kind of journalism and features and profiles that we're going to be doing. But please, we'll never discourage you from just hitting that subscribe button for $7 a month if you'd like, or $70 a year. So it's been awesome. The feedback has been incredible, and specifically with your listeners. I mean, they've just been amazing. I mean, after that Packers story came out, it was really humbling just to kind of see not just tweets from all these familiar faces I remember from the beat, but I mean, people signing up. You can sign up for the free email list, you can subscribe, and can definitely assure everybody we'll keep checking in on those Packers because they're going to be fascinating for a long time.
Hell yeah, Ty. Appreciate it, man. And go sign up for his newsletter. I don't know many people in this business who work harder or do better work than Ty Dunne. So, and he just has the perfect initials, TD. I mean, come on.
Oh man. Hey, I really appreciate that, dude. That means a lot. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ty.
This is Vinny Iyer, host of Locked On Fantasy Football with your Locked On Fantasy Football Edge of the Day. Congratulations if you made the playoffs in your fantasy football league. You've done a lot of great work with your roster and lineups to get to this point. But don't let up now when there's the most at stake. Stick with the players and strategies that got you there, leaning on all the resources you can to get the most updated information and analysis. Make smart calls and changes when necessary, but don't go crazy making big changes and getting too cute with the decisions. You definitely want to keep winning, and that only comes with continuing to bring your best. Get the edge in your fantasy football league every day by listening to Locked On Fantasy Football on your preferred podcast provider.
The NFL season is here, so don't be the football fan who doesn't know what they're talking about when you could be the most informed fan on the block with the innovators in modern football analytics at Football Outsiders. I use them in my work every day, and they're trusted by professional and college teams, so why wouldn't you want to get in on the action? Kick off this season with the Football Outsiders Almanac, over 500 pages full of team previews and exclusive projections, or even better, get yourself a Football Outsiders Plus membership, which includes the Almanac, fantasy projections, NFL picks, DVOA database, and much more. Become an outsider today with 25% off the entire store with promo code KICKOFF25. That's 25% off the entire store with promo code KICKOFF25. All right, I want to thank Ty again for joining the program. Always great to talk to him. We're going to be back tomorrow, crossover Thursday, our live show on Friday to get you set for Packers Lions 2.0. I don't expect it to go that differently from Packers Lions 1.0, but of course we will see and talk to Matt Derry from Locked On Lions all about it tomorrow. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers. And anytime you want to hit us up on the Locked On Packers fan hotline, you can do that, 920-341-3775 to stay Locked On Packers.
What's up, everyone? I'm Kane Pittman, host of Locked On Bucks, your daily podcast on the Milwaukee Bucks. Subscribe and listen every day for plenty of talk about Giannis, plenty of talk about Chris Middleton, and what about Drew Holiday? Right now, we're focused in on the Bucks' pursuit of their second NBA championship. It comes in the 50th year anniversary of the 1971 championship. There couldn't be a better time to take that next step and reach the NBA Finals. Subscribe to Locked On Bucks wherever you get your podcasts.
Dunne. Zook on top. Zook on top. Zook on top. Rogan? Holmes. Zook on top. Zook on top. Yes.
Holmes.
Zoek on top. Zoek on top.
Holmes.
Zoek on top. Zoek on top. Zoek on top. Holmes. Zoek on top. Zoek on top. Dunne.
Holmes.
Zoek on top. Zoek on top. Zoek on top. Zoek on top. Broken? Zoek on top.
Holmes.
Zoek on top. Zoek on top.
Holmes.
Zoek on top. Zoek on top. Fury. Zoek on top. Allemaal. IJzer. Dunne. Zoek on top. Oklahoma. Lauren. Allemaal. Oklahoma. Allemaal. IJzer. Rogan. Allemaal. Holmes. Fury. Holmes. Isa. Holmes. Yuri. Alamaz. Holmes. Holmes. Zokontal. Yuri. Holmes. Alamaz. Holmes. Alamaz. Holmes. Yuri. Isa. Holmes. You're on it. Yuri. Holmes. Oklahoma.